and you have to be like,
and
to stand up to answer
the founder of DoWhatULuv
Foundation.
Hello, everyone. Today we're very honored to have our guest, Tong Guan, the founder of DoWhatULuv Foundation. Personally, I find his determination and energy really inspiring. Welcome to PathForward podcast, Tom.
Thank you so much, Jackie.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we went back a long way, really. I think I have known you more than a decade, right?
Yeah, definitely. Time flies. Wow.
Like I think I met you when it was like 2014.
Yeah.
And I think that's even before DoWhatULuv Foundation like become a charitable organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we first started as a nonprofit organization, registered federal nonprofit, and then extra provincially registered in BC. I have to legally say that just to cover all my ends. But yes, definitely that was, I think, when we first started. It took us about, after we became a nonprofit, it took about 18 months to become a registered charity. So then we definitely met like before we got the official status.
That was really time fly. When you just first started the foundation, like you were contacting the school, did anyone respond to you actually?
Not really. No. And I think that's like, but it was a great experience. I feel like because it made me really understand better about how our other people might be like also interacting with our education systems and other organizations and program providers that are also looking to offer services. It gave me a good insight and firsthand experience on what people usually go through, and then which is you have a lot of ideas and eagerness to want to offer your support and service or help, but then you try your best to go through the public channels that and then but then
it just really, like that, no response,
just no, like very 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 little. And then it was mostly through, I would say, in referrals and connections, and other ways of just somehow the universe has this way of networking. One school district did get back to me eventually after a few attempts, which was a Surrey school district. And that was also because they had a lot of need to work with different community partners that they can donate services.
So I guess that's like basically how it all started. And one interesting question though, where's the money come from when you first registered DoWhatULuv Foundation as a nonprofit?
That was monopoly money. I was hoping I could get away with using it, but no, it was definitely student loan money.
Okay,
for sure. Yeah, which is definitely was just it was like a credit, if you will.
Yeah,
and so that's why I joke around and say it's monopoly money, because that's what credit almost like. It's just monopoly money. You just make it. But then that's what I had is some leftover from a university, a few $1,000s, and initially that's what I used, because otherwise I had nothing.
And that was the fact that really surprised me actually when I look back. I did not know you were still in school actually at the time when you just first started DoWhatULuv Foundation, because it's such a huge task, and I wouldn't imagine you can like manage school at the same time and build this just gigantic platform, out of it. I was just really surprised now when you talk back, No,
thank you. No, it started a lot smaller for sure, but it was definitely, when we first met, it was, I was in school, and it was definitely quite an interesting journey.
But I still remember, I think the program, the platform or the foundation basically grew really quickly. I think in the beginning it's only like maybe 3 or 4 programs. And I think 1 year later, you already have like close to 20 programs or something like that. And I think you have to upgrade your system and all that stuff. I remember even in the very early beginning.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. It's that was I think it was more about figuring out what we wanted to do and how we wanted to grow, and what was our vision for kind of expansion or purpose. And I think the biggest piece through that process was understanding and validating our role in this bigger picture, in this bigger kind of gigantic education systems. And once we kind of figured out the role that we saw ourselves fulfilling, we were able to align or kind of work in a way that was very much more like efficient. And a big part of that was after the first few years of just trying to kind of offer our own services and programs. And such as like we started off by kind of bringing in martial art or Muay Thai kind of like self-defense, yoga, and hip hop, street dance, urban dance into or break dance and such into the school systems, and then in the after school time. And so I think after that process, it really made me understand that like there's like all these programs are very much needed out there to different people, and yet none of these programs were meant to be the end, like the solution to everyone's interests and needs, to all the kids, right? There was no one glove fits all, and there were always some kids who engaged with an activity more than others. So then, and that's kind of made me understood, like there was no way that we can create programs that could be literally like fit for 100% of people out there, and also trying to figure out what types of programs or new programs or activities we have never even thought of before. That was tough because as an outsider, if you will, to an education kind of segment, or let's say a subject, like how am I supposed to know like what's the best way to create a program or to educate youth and inspire them? So then that's when I kind of realized too, it's like I'm not really the right kind of person or to be kind of figuring those things out. And whereas in the initial process, I think it helped me realize more was that made me meet a lot of people that did come from all these different kind of education backgrounds and fields, who all had an interest and passion, who wanted to provide their services and serve the community and educate the future generations. And then but then it was always kind of everyone had the same challenges, which was like, well, we reach out to the school district, or reach out to how do you even go about it? Bring together people from different areas who wants to kind of who share a similar vision to do that, to offer their services and bring more outlets into the school system, and then basically trying to kind of make that process much easier. That you have more bargaining power, if you will, right? And that was the whole idea, was like, how do we kind of bring together these people and create a collective and a network where, as a whole, we will get taken a lot more seriously than if we were just kind of all working alone, right? And
But most people know DoWhatULuv Foundation as a virtual community market platform, kind of like for after school program. But I know your vision is much bigger than that, just like what you say. And this is really new for this podcast. I just really want to explore like the deeper goals and vision of DoWhatULuv Foundation by connecting it to your personal experience.
Yep.
So you ready for the ride?
Yeah, so let's give it a try.
Okay. So I mean, the idea of DoWhatULuv Foundation was taking form in the university, like what you said, like more clear. But the seed of it was sold during your high school year. And can you share like the story or your experience when you were like working as a part-time merchandiser and you were restocking the clearance section or something like that?
Yeah, for sure. No, definitely. That was as a kid, like, in that age group too, you're trying to figure out what you want to do in your future, and sometimes you really just have no clue. And
if you don't mind, I just want to clarify first. So how old were you at that point?
I think it was like 16, 17. Yeah. And because I actually been working, like trying to find like just part-time jobs and stuff like that to kind of keep busy and make some pocket money and keep myself out of trouble, like ever since I was like 14 years old. So then, like at 16, 17, like I just kind of like, excuse me. And it was like something that like I always did like on a Friday or like like a Saturday or something like that, where I was just kind of be working, those like late night shifts or those kind of end shifts. And so like a lot of times like you had the work that I was doing, I remember, as a shopper's drug mart, as a merchandiser. Actually, like at the time, some of it I felt like therapeutic, because you're just like, restocking things and making things look organized. And in some sense, I, of course, sometimes I didn't enjoy it as much, but then and in certain moments you're just like, wow, okay, like, it kind of just puts you in a zone, and your mind is just kind of goes off somewhere, even while you're kind of like, focused on doing the work and making things organized. So then, yeah, so I had all those kind of late night moments where I'd be just kind of like daydreaming. There'd be like already like nobody or very few customers or almost none sometimes, like towards the end of the evening, and then so just like the entire space, and then some background music, and there's just you there, and then you're just like in the zone, and you just wonder, like, and that's kind of what I did. Like my mind was just like in different places, thinking about, okay, well, like what could be the future, holds, and of course, like you didn't know, most people didn't know, I didn't know, but at the same time, I just always, I guess, had this idea of kind of like, doing something to bring people together, or something, uniting kind of people through the power of like arts, or bringing together, communities through like, arts, and like the power of art and things like those. So it was like it was like yeah, it was without really kind of like specific context. So yeah, so that's kind of like initially just, you can say, how it first, like, I guess, the glimpse of it.
Yeah.
And I guess like part of the reason is because I just, there were a lot of other experiences that I kind of had before that just still made me kind of realize, even as young as I was back then, just how much, I guess, potential that, like, these future generations and people had, even though I was just a little kid at the time too.
So like what you were mentioning, and this is also from our conversation before, one of the core purpose or core goal of DoWhatULuv Foundation is to give the future generation a better shot. Why do you think the school experience is so important?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I thought about this for a long time, and I just, and I think like sometimes when you're kind of introduced to something, or when you're just told, or taught that, oh, like this is that, like as a kid, sometimes you just accept it. But then, later on, it wasn't until later on that I actually reflect back and like, what, and why, and so yes, how do people grow up and start to make sense of the world that they live in, right? And because we are a product of our society and our environment, and our young people's brains and young children's brains, it's like a sponge that soaks up everything that they possibly can from the moment that they're turned on, if you will, to just try to make sense and understand the world, and how to interpret the things that are going around us. A huge influential part of it is like the parents and the people who are kind of nurture the child and take care of them. But then it's like, the things that you learn and things you pick up, the habits and, things, even though like, a lot of times like parents, like new parents will always say like, oh, how did the kid like pick up this thing? Like, that I did, like, I didn't even think that I was doing it much, but then somehow like, kids just have the ability to like kind of learn these things. And so that's what they're doing. Like they're always learning. Learning. So without even knowing about it, they are somehow introduced into an informal type of societal education system from the moment that they're born, right? And then they get transitioned into more of like a community base as they're kind of grown, and then they get transitioned into like a more of an institutionalized and system based kind of system, right? But essentially, it's like from the moment that they're born, they are somehow introduced and, if you will, or if indoctrinated into whatever systems that they belong to at that time, or the system that they're taught to live in, right? So in that sense, like it's all a education system from the beginning, right? And then so then basically like their belief system and what they do, and how they make sense of the world, what is important of the world history, and their morals and ethics and all these things. These are all part of what kids learn, how the perspective that people have. And if you want to change the future world, you have to change people's perspectives. And how do you influence people's perspectives is by kind of going back further into like understanding like, well, what is this whole journey of education that like essentially almost every single person in this planet like will go through one way or another, right? Even if you know, are in a place where there is no formal education systems, that you are still learning from somewhere, from somebody, right? So that's the reason why it's like, I think, you know, I became so intrigued about, you know, just the whole process of education and such.
So but let's talk about yourself a little bit. Like, you moved from Beijing to Canada when you were 10 years old, and after experience the Canadian school system in the beginning, you discover how to be a kid and a student, like the way that you describe it. Like, can you explain a little bit how this feeling come about?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. You know, going back to, yeah, very much tying to the same thing. You know, I think one of the reason why I was able to kind of have all these different perspectives about the education systems was because I think I was lucky enough, or some people would call it unlucky enough, to, you know, where you've had the opportunity to actually go through all these very, very, very different systems that were designed with very different purpose and ideologies, and then experiencing them, and then actually being able to look back and compare and reflect, right? I think just because of the sheer size of the population, you know, there's a huge amount of competition among education and the schooling. So then, and also because like of you know, the way of the culture and society and the government systems over there, it's like it's a, you know, they adopt more of like a military cadet style of kind of training and education. So then the expectation was just that, even as a kid, like, you know, what I went through was, after the first month of being a 6-year-old in grade 1, like, you are absolutely required to memorize the entire multiplications table up to 9. And that was literally like a legitimate goal, like that they were not kidding about, to the point where like kids got like penalized. I mean, things that might be considered like not okay over here, but at that time, you know, in a very different world, you know, kids were essentially like forced and intimidated in some ways to basically do that, right? But you know, but of course, like, at the time it sucked, but I think it did also have a lot of benefits, right? You know, because if I can go back and have the opportunity to go back and reflect, you know, it's like it taught me about discipline in some ways, and taught me just the importance of just knowing your fundamentals, you know. And then after school, like, you know, we there are more kind of tutoring sessions that are in school, right? You know, school don't finish until 5:30 over there, and then literally from like after 2 to 5, it's just straight up like homework, tutoring, extracurricular, whatever stuff. But it's all done as part of school, right? And then, but then, you know, a lot of times, like, evenings, you just have more homework to do. So there's like not a lot of time to actually go out and play. And then, so to your point, it's like, when I first came to Canada and moved to Canada, and I was like, I remember first, like, I was resistant to what I didn't know, of course. So I was like, just telling my mom, like, you know, I don't want to come here. I don't want to go to school here. I want to go back to China and go to school there. But then after the first day, you know, I kind of realized, I was like, wow, like, I can just play. Like, really, like, I just think that, like, you know, you can kind of get in trouble for it. Like, you know, it's like you can fidget around, like, you know, because in China, like, you are told, like, here's your desk. Right, you have your books are supposed to be like stacked on top of each other, orderly on one corner. You know, your pencil case is supposed to be, you know, centered over here, and then your rulers, or whatever it is, like, and your water bottle has to be like in a certain, like, it's like a very systematic kind of like a education style, right? And then you have to be like, you know, sitting straight, back straight, with your hand like, you know, tucked behind your back, and you're just paying attention, sitting like this for, like, you know, the entire period, like 45 minutes, until like, and the only time you get to move around is like raise your hand to answer a question, and to stand up to answer the question, right? That's it. Like, there's nothing. You can't ask for washroom. You can't fidget around. You can't do anything. Like, that's just, you know, at least what the kids that I grew up with in China, like, I think that my first day in school over here was the first time in, you know, in school ever that I was able to fidget around and ask to go to the washroom and like just or just pick up the water bottle and start like drinking water without like being yelled at.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that's what I was like, and then the recesses were a lot longer, right? And then there was like virtually no homework, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then like some homework was just like some basic vocab stuff.
Yeah.
And then or I had to go to ESL. I had some like worksheets.
Yeah.
But other than that, like it just like whatever other homework that my mom made me do. But then it was just, but like from the school, like it was just. And again, it's like I feel like.
Good and bad.
Yeah,
both,
yeah.
Right?
There's both good and bad. Yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by JW Music Studio. From our conversation with Tong, we were reminded of the value of nurturing an artistic perspective. The artistic pursuit is at its heart a pursuit of beauty. It centers on meaning, human experience, and long-term value. When music education is approached thoughtfully, it becomes a space where students learn to listen deeply and think creatively. For example, when a student spends time refining a musical phrase, they are learning patience, emotional sensitivity, and the value of nuance. Music education teaches students to embrace the process, not just the result, and to pursue excellence as an expression of care and integrity. Let your child experience music education today. Sign up to JW Music Studio.
And that's what I'm like always feeling like it'd be great to somehow like, be like a middle ground where there's an alternative system that could be more of like, kind of utilizing the best of both worlds, right? Because I do see the benefits and the downside to both approach, right? And depending on what purpose you need to fulfill in your society, in your country, in your nation, I guess it's a different approach for everyone.
Yeah.
But what is the right one for the world for the future? We don't know. Right?
Yeah, we don't know. Sure. And then the other focus for DoWhatULuv Foundation is bringing creative outlet into the school system. And when you first moved to Canada, I know your mom moved you a lot. Basically, you move a lot. How did moving around and this experience improve your social skills? Basically, you change school like kind of frequently. And how was like your art talent? I think you were mainly focused on drawing. I think
for sure.
How did you to build relationship in a new environment too?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because a lot of these creative passion, it transcends all boundaries in terms of language and cultural barriers. They don't need a language to communicate because it communicates in its own way, right? So then socially, in a different environment, language-wise, I didn't really fully speak I was still learning like how to speak the language. So that was like definitely tough. But then, I think the biggest challenge was to figure out how you can relate and connect to others around you, and to develop that sense of like you belong something. And so then art, that was kind of what I found as a way of how I can do that. Right. So anytime when I go to a new school or new class or meet new kids, and if we were engaged in like, arts and drawing and stuff, like that was like how I was able to kind of like, connect and relate and communicate, because like I had some more practice than the other kids before. Right? So then so of course, like I was creating, better looking, results because of the more practice. So then, and that was like a way of like, oh, that's cool. Like, oh, how'd you do that? Oh, like that looks so realistic. Like, like even though I may not have understood, exactly what was going on, but I can see like you were like, oh wow, like that's cool. Like, and then that was like another way for like other kids to kind of like, engage with me, right? And then and over time, like that just kind of picked up. I was like, okay, well, this is like, I carved out, or at least I discovered a little bit of something where I can, kind of build upon, even as a little kid, as your own identity, if you will, right? And especially like, and that's super important, especially when kids before kids develop that or they become lost,
Yeah.
right? You need to figure out things where it's like that kind of you can feel like you identify with, and that can build your confidence and self-esteem and a lot of things. So then that was how I discovered that. And so yeah, that's how I kind of understood later on too, is like, for me it was art, but for others, like, there are tons and countless of other outlets out there, right? And it could be also academic too. Like, there's no question about that. It was just that what connected with me was just artistic stuff. And but hey, for some kids who love like reading, writing, reading books, and sharing over like stories, knowledge, and like that's amazing too. But it's just like whatever, it's just different, and so that's what made me realize, like, from a very different perspective, was like, wow, like, kids being able to find and connect with these outlets is like so powerful, because it really shapes them, like, who they are, even if they don't end up becoming like that thing that they're passionate about at the time, but still, like, it becomes like what they do, like, has a huge impact on their character, right, on their identity, and how they weather through all the uncertainties in the process of growing up and trying to figure out who they are, or who they want to become, right? So that's so that's kind of like, just starting from drawing stick people. That's what it turned out, that's so there is there is an impact there, like.
Now, one of the vision you have for Do What You Love Foundation is to create a system that run by itself. Despite any kind of circumstances, the system can still work. Whether you are the founder, or like you're the, in a sense, you're the CEO of this foundation or not, it can still run. That is, in a sense, that's your vision. You want to build a system. So how was being a student in art and industrial design give you the insight and confidence to build such a long-lasting system, in a sense?
Great question. I honestly don't know. Well, I would say still, it's always a work in progress. It's always something that's I'm trying to work towards and improve myself, and learning to become whoever I need to become to actually achieve that. But I would say one big thing is that that was a little bit different for me when I first started, was that I came from an arts background, so without any business background. So then I kind of looked at things initially, and I still do, even though I might forget sometimes, is that I still look at things from the perspective of like an artist, if you will, right? And then and if as an artist, like, you're always trying to perfect a masterpiece, if you will. You're always trying to perfect your craft, and there is no kind of, like, even if, let's say, a painting was like, like a Picasso made a painting, like, that became famous today, but a lot of times too, it's like, more often than not, it's like, if lets you at that, in that moment, if you ask the artist, there will be still things that they say that they're unhappy about, with their art, and it's just things that only they can see, right? It's just imperfections that they can, like, only they know and can pick up on. So there is that sense of like evolution of improvement, right? And the fact that, like, you can create also art pieces, and that channels beautiful messages and vision and energies, for, like, that transcends time and boundaries, and that can create some sort of a legacy for for as long as that piece exists, right? And even in art that was created hundreds of years ago, today still has an impact on people. So that was the concept, or at least perspectives that I had when studying art and design, and that was kind of my vision, and what I tried to kind of envision, even for creating a company, or building this organization, and are creating any sorts of services and products, is that it's through that lens of the artistic kind of pursuit, right? Like, how do I kind of make this better and better, and more of a masterpiece, and even though other people see it's like, oh, it's great, but you you always know it's like, oh, like there's certain things that like, I don't know, like, I want to make it better, and things like those. But you also like want to kind of create something that can like last longer than your time, right? And that is like, it's, I would say, as an artist, I kind of gives me that glimpse of how to like, of a different perspective in that sense. You do need to create some sort of systems that can like, allow things to succeed, right? And bring together people, and putting together, if you create some sort of like, sustainable kind of loop, if you will, right? And then that can somehow feed into itself, or the way that the organization, the system is built upon, it's always feeding into each other. So you create some natural momentum, right? Just based on what people need and demands and supplies. Like then it's like also like with the right steward, if you will, and the right kind of a guiding stone and in place. Like I think that's how you can create some sort of like sustainable, ongoing thing, right? But again, it has to be creating, figuring out how to create something that people actually need. That's actually going to be useful and purposeful, and that even if it didn't exist, people out there will still be trying to figure out how to do this in one way or another themselves, right? That is something where it's like, how do you solve a need like that in society? Because then like it has, then like the ability for it to exist beyond you is not just tied to you anymore.
And one of the goals for DoWhatULuv Foundation is to build a system that is sustainable, scalable, and systemic, right? Then I often look at it, when you talk about that, you have to look at it like a business. Like what you were saying, right? You just collect a lot of provider, in a sense, like one of the provider for after school program. And then you have more bargaining power to do different kind of thing. And to me, this is all very business kind of thinking oriented. Interestingly, like what you said, you don't have any business background. But I feel like every time I met you, every time like kind of like I talk to you once after like a while, you always have some like awesome project is going on, like bringing students to Beijing for cultural exchange. You were advising Rocky Mountain Tier Whale Tour for expanding to Chinese market in one point. I think a while ago you were consulting for like housing initiative or something like that. I think
there's some projects I do on that.
So how was building like DoWhatULuv Foundation help you develop a skill in business, or business consultants in this case?
Anything in business, it's really dealing with like human behaviors, and I think that's what I learned later on that I didn't really see before. And all these things that you mentioned, that like trying to bring people together and having more collective like bargaining power and all that stuff. It's like, they might be like sound like their business strategies, but like but part of my perspective, even just from learning and reading about like kind of autobiographies and history and big events and things that changes, big breakthroughs that happen throughout histories and things that change the course of the world and things like that. A lot of time it's just like, I think it's just based on the behaviors of the people and and things like, right. And then so I think like learning how to manage that, or how to kind of understand and how to better work with that, can then like basically apply to like so many different areas of things that that can translate into business and such, right. And even like that whole concept of like creating a community platform, that idea is not really necessarily original, right. And and in fact, like biggest part of one part of like, I guess what kind of inspired me to even think about that was when I was learning about the history of like the Mongols or whatever, like just again, I was like a bit of a history geek, if you will, because there's that saying, if you want to know where you're going, you have to know where you came from, like and then so I was like, big part, that's why one of the reasons I dug into history a lot. And then there was that kind of that period of time when that was that one kind of defining moment, right, where Genghis Khan, like debatable figure, like by loved and hated by so many around the world, like, and debatable with like what the result of their actions. But at the same time, it's like when he was just a I guess like a homeless kind of like a tribeless, right? When he tried to unite all the people and all the different Mongol tribes, he gave a really good example. He said like if you're he pulled out one arrow, right? And he said if you're one arrow, it can easily break it. He snapped it, but he was then if you talk about a bundle of arrow, like a handful, but he said, but if you bound together, you can't break it. And that was the whole kind of like I guess the guiding principle or kind of inspiration, because I'm like, okay, all providers, organizations, small providers, small businesses working on their own trying to do this, it's so easy for them to just give up, and then for just like things to go nowhere, and then it disappears in the ether forever, right? And it's so easy for them to get out pressured and out negotiated, out demanded by different people or in the systems and such. But then when you kind of like collect them all together, it's like you're a lot more stronger. Now you can reach further, you can go further, you can connect with places in a way where maybe that like there would be not as much respect from people to do so before, but now you are part of this collective. Even when like the stuff that I do for consulting, what I learned a lot was just understanding how to work with human behaviors, right? And a lot of the things that I learned that I'm offering consulting on, I was never taught on any of it. It was just a matter of like, the human behavioral side of like how you figure out how to do something, get something done, right? And the steps you would take, or like the method or your approach to figure out how to get something done, right? And I think I had a lot, for me, the benefit of that was I started a nonprofit and a registered charity where there was no resources, and nor did people expect that there were a lot of resources was available. So then a lot of it was just like, well, we need to do this. Well, how are we going to pay for it? Well, we can't. So then just try to figure it out, right? And then and if you can't figure it out, well, go ask for help. Not everyone's going to give it to you, but if you just have that intention, it's like, I'm looking for help. I'm looking for ways to learn this, right? Like somehow, the right outlet, after a few try, you might just find it. Oh, okay, well, that's how you can learn something, right? So then, so again, it really kind of like, it just pushes you like, okay, like how you to kind of push me to really just like, how much was I willing to go out there to ask questions to learn, right? And it forced me to just be a mindset of a student always, always stuff that I don't know, but it also made me very eager to learn. Like I would be like, if I don't know something, I will go read up about everything about it, like if possible, and go find whatever I can find about it, and that's even how I learned how to drive a manual car. Because nobody, again, like, and a lot of the business administrative stuff that I do consulting with, it's like, well, nobody would sit there for like months and just read the government website. Like, who would sit there and go through pages and pages of like CRA indexes and sub pages and links and definitions, and who would do that on, it just, nobody would, right? But at the same time, it's like, if you really, really, really want to do something desperate enough and you have no other way to do it, with money, right? You just have to go figure it out, like how to do it, right? And then what do? Just you have to put in the time. But I did put in the time, right? And now those skills is what's translates back down to now other people are willing to pay me money.
And one of the interesting about DoWhatULuv Foundation is it is a charitable organization. I do understand that, but your focus is not solely just on the vulnerable population of the school. You have a well-around approach. You just encourage the kid, from different socio-economical background to come play and learn together, essentially. But for yourself, what was your experience like to program that is designated for vulnerable kid, basically?
Yeah, great question. I personally, again, I can only speak from my own experience, right? I can't speak for potentially millions and millions of kids out there who might be benefiting for some of these services. It's just that, but I personally really didn't enjoy or hated that concept. I think every single time I was offered, either by someone from school or from my mom about to join a program like that. I basically fought to stay out of it and refused. I was like throwing fits, and I was like, I need to make sure they really understand. I don't want to be there, that type of thing, right? And I didn't really like it just because I just felt, I felt it really kind of came with a stigma and a lot of labels that I was sensitive to. And I was also sensitive to not like, and to really kind of keeping, whatever struggles we were going through, like just privately ourselves, like I don't want to be in a program where other kids and be like when kids go to a zoo, they're like, oh, look at all these like chimpanzees, like, they're like, like look at them chasing each other around and blah, 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 right? And that was kind of the idea. It was like, of course, like not chimpanzees, but it's like, it was still very much like a public knowledge, like, oh, look at those kids, like, these are kids who cannot afford anything.
At JW's Music Studio, we offer more than just music lessons. We also nurture future leaders in music education. Our Piano Teacher Apprenticeship Program is an initiative designed for advanced piano students who are ready to take the next step from student to teacher. This program provides a structured, supportive pathway into music teaching. Participants are mentored through every stage, from interview and training to guided teaching and independent lessons, all while being compensated as they grow. Whether your teen is exploring a career in teaching or simply wants to deepen their connection to music, this program offers real-world skills in a safe, encouraging environment. Contact us today at jnwmusic@yahoo.ca.
There to be known as hey, like Tong belonged to that, like, chimpanzee group, like, because like that's how obvious, like, I think a lot of the label was and the stigma, right? And it sounds funny when I kind of make a joke, like, but then but it is awful too, it's totally awful, right? It's like nobody wants to walk around be like and call the chimpanzee, and nobody wants to walk around and be called poor either, right? And it's just the same thing. So it's like, so for me, I really didn't gel with it. And then but I know like a lot of the communities that I went to, they only some. And again, it's like, and that's why, like I said, like even which school communities gets very limited resources and very kind of restricted resources like this, even, right? It's better than nothing. But even who gets to decide is based on an office where like it's somebody deciding, oh, this community get this community get that community, no, you get nothing. It's like, who is it, like, who are they to really like decide, how these kids should live, and be, given the opportunity to thrive, like it just made no sense. There was like a very big disconnection, right? And also the kids that the friends that I had at the time too, it's like a lot of them also who came from similar shoes, either come from a single parent household, newcomer, new immigrant, and or they were dealing with some sort of transitioning and struggles, and it's most of them who would qualify to be in these programs, a lot of them like had the same feeling. They're just like, they were like, nah, and so I think like a lot of the kids who related to each other in that way, actually formed a stronger bond together, right? And actually, like if you look at, and again, this could be totally wrong, but I'm always looking at what are some of the unintended consequences of certain actions and programs or strategies that may have been outdated, right? And one of the unintended consequences is that programs like this actually allows kids who feels disenfranchised and disconnected to form stronger bonds together, to gain up against, like to essentially rebel against that thing even further. And now they just become easier targets for gang influences. Right? So then it's like the very programs that were meant to kind of like, get these kids like out of trouble or keep them in a better place ends up making them easier targets. Because now like all these kids are hanging out together because like I don't want to be in that pack program, right? So there's something unspoken, right? There are tons of people who don't fit into that extreme, situation, but are still very much in that vulnerable segment. Most of these kids will feel differently, right, about those kids who are in the very extreme dire needs, right? So again, it's like, that's why I said, like, trying to dictate the programs and the activities is very difficult, because it's like very difficult to have one size that fits all, right? And I'm sure that these programs were designed to work with kids in all spectrum of that vulnerability, not just the extremes, but so far from what I could tell, or what I experienced, that the most amount of benefits are actually going towards the extreme ones, and everyone else is just kind of falling off the track. Some of them may be kind of caught in that safety net and is able to get some support and do better in their own situation, but then there's also a lot of kids that just falls through, right? And then how I know is because that a lot of these people that did fall through, these people who I once called friends and used to play on a field, like playing tag and soccer with, some of them ended up in jail, some of them ended up like overdosing and then losing their life when they're in their early 20s, and like some of them never made it to 25, and many, and then a lot of them were like ended up being involved with kind of gang related violence and activities and stuff like that. So like, of course, like everything I describe is not necessarily just like an idea. Like it's like it's based on like actual like what things that took place. Like it's based on real experience. And it's how I'm able to kind of develop these insights. It's not just like I studied some thesis and read a textbook and then wrote a 28-page paper and then all of a sudden the idea just appeared. Or no, like it's not. Right, that's what maybe PhD and master's degrees with those people would require. But I felt like what I gained was just literally legitimate hands-on experience, right? And that I feel like at least to me, it probably can teach. At least it taught me more than what I feel like any of these kind of theses would be teaching me, right? And but even if that's also a little bit of downside too. It's unfortunate is that the people who gets to be involved with making decisions on policies usually come from the thesis side. And that's the unfortunate situation that we have in our situation and our system. It's just that how do you fix the situation when the setup is in a way more to just kind of like keep the status quo.
Now let's move on to something very different, perhaps. I remember at one point you get a very glamorous kind of position. You were like flying around with private jet and go to all these fancy places like presidential suite or whatever. Can you explain a little bit what was this position about, and like how did it come to you, and like what kind of people you were working with like in that point?
Very interesting journey for sure. And I had this random opportunity to work with the family member or the father of a longtime friend that I grew up with, who I'm actually like played volleyball with. He was my volleyball coach, and they come from a background of like business, and then later on, like I found out that that their father and uncles were like considered like business moguls in Southeast Asia in the 80s and 90s, where they were the ones who essentially brought in, who essentially opened up Vietnam's market to the rest of the Western world. And a big part of it was bringing in Petro-Canada, Coca-Cola, Heineken beer, and Red Bull, and not just getting them established in Vietnam, but essentially like to all the other Southeast Asia countries. And they became like very, very, very successful in that aspect. So like, I didn't know this for a very long time, because they're very like humble. They don't talk about it. They don't brag about it, right? And but later on, I had the opportunity to kind of learn like more about that. Like when I went to visit my friend who was living in Vietnam at the time for business, and I learned from the locals, and then that like they actually like they're a big deal here.
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, oh well, like I didn't know that, right?
Yeah.
So then about a year or so later, or soon later, like I had an opportunity to reconnect and meet with their family members again, and then just one thing led to another. I had a opportunity to essentially like work closely with like my friend's dad, like more on the kind of like as an executive assistant side, just to kind of help to learn and help him out with certain things that he needed support with, and also like because he was at a time where he was also just focused on like health and wellness and trying to kind of like improve certain areas of health, and so at that time he was already less involved in the kind of like the big business kind of dealings. Like he was more on the kind of semi-retired or retire kind of type of side, and then it was just more focused on like kind of his personal stuff, right? So then so I had the opportunity to work with him for about 6 months, 6 to 7 months on that, where we're really like, it just randomly all of a sudden it's like from running a Do What You Love and basically essentially not have any resources to kind of pay myself, and was still working on other contracts and jobs to like whatever to kind of like sustain myself, and and not really having gone on any vacations or any trips or anything kind of like nice, like and then for many years, I think at that time it would have been already 4 or 5 years, I think, at least for like 5 years at the time of like Do What You Love, of like a lot of just like going through initial hardships and struggles, to all of a sudden it's like like next week all of a sudden I'm like in a private jet, and I'm like okay, I'm just like they're like like we're going to this place, like come to the south terminal of YVR. I'm like, there's a south terminal at YVR? And then they're like, you just like, it's the private lane, you just go drive up and then they'll let you in, and then and you park and then you just walk up to the runway. I'm like, okay, cool. And then that's how it kind of just like how big that kind of just randomly kind of thing just kind of experiences that I was blessed with to experience, and then next and then basically like for 6 months it was like I was just kind of in this, like I felt like I was in like a different world, different universe, because I was like living and working in their world, because I feel like for a long time, and I think for a lot of young people too, like that from the glam you see on TV, Hollywood and all that stuff, like you are kind of taught or led to believe, right, through an informal societal education, right, going back to the beginning, right, societal education, that's what life supposed to, success, in life is supposed to be like, that's what you're supposed to be working towards, and like that's what makes you happy, blah blah blah, right? That's what society teaches us. But then like it was really strange, because when I like was in those kind of situations and environment, and of course it was like super awesome to be surrounded by nice stuff, but I felt like it just wasn't it. And that was a very strange feeling. I was like, and by all means, like good for those people that were able to like somehow one way or another to have all these things, right? And but at least to me, it just didn't really feel like, whoa, like that's really not what like I should be working towards. I don't know. It just felt like for a brief moment that like if I wanted to, I felt like I probably could have like stayed and worked in that lifestyle and world for maybe forever, right? And a lot of people say my life could have literally been changed with an opportunity like that, because you can just go get your realtor license, right? And then you don't have to even practice. Like we'll just literally like because we have to make investments, but instead of like going to like other realtors, we just literally like we can like use your license, right? And then you'll be managing investments and like certain kind of business aspect of things where dealing with kind of properties and things like those, where the life that I was essentially being kind of promised, essentially it was like me being like living comfortably in like a multi-millionaire type of environment, and my purpose was to kind of just, you know, basically serve like their needs for in business and kind of these like, you know, internal affairs that they only would entrust it a few people, you know, to do, right? And that meant completely giving up that whatever other commitment that I had. Like if you ask 100 people, I'm pretty sure 99 would tell them like, hey, you should have gone with the other direction. Just dropped everything else, like, you know, screw all these things that you're doing, just like, you know, who cares about these people, right? You know, like that would have been what 99 people, like, you know, out of 100 would have said. But then what kind of, I don't know, what really kind of stuck with me, or I couldn't get over it, was just like, you know, even though I was surrounded by all these things, I felt really, at least myself, I felt really lonely. I felt empty. I felt like there was no, I didn't really feel I had a purpose there. Right? That's probably what it felt like. And that defied logic. Right? Even though logically, you know, it was telling me, oh, this is a good opportunity. But like something in my, you know, like heart and soul or in the gut or whatever, like, you know, didn't really enjoy like who I would have had to let go, and who I would have to become to serve a different purpose, right? And you know, because it's my life and whatever purpose that I was, you know, I was gonna give it, right? And then so, and the other reason too, it's like I just felt like, you know, even though I was surrounded by all these material things still, but it wasn't mine, and it wasn't something I really worked towards. Like I didn't earn it. Like I don't know, maybe like it was just there. I got to use it, play with it, but it just felt like I didn't really deserve that. For like, you know, my life, it was like, okay, like I was still in my mid-20s and was like, okay, well, could I picture, you know, like my purpose for the rest of my next 40, 50, 60 years to be like, you know, that, and then basically like having to give up like whatever, all these other things that I learned and purpose that is discovered, and basically had to just walk away from it, right? And then so that part was what kind of like, yeah, I kind of took away in the end, like and then the awesome material things, like although it would still be awesome, like, you know, and then you know, and also like it made me kind of like also learn that, you know what, it's okay to also like enjoy that, like, you know, when you've worked for it, and when it's like, when you feel like, yeah, you know, you deserve it and it's yours, right? And, you know, I would love that still, and it made me, you know, understand it's possible to do that, right? You know, you're always taught like, oh, if you, like, society is always misled to thinking if you have all these material things and you're just successful. But that's the opposite. It's like you're successful first through whatever you do, then all these other things can become possible. Not the other way around. Because if it came to you the other way around, you'll be still very lost, because you just feel a deep sense of unsatisfaction and emptiness, right? And versus if you worked for it and the other way around. So again, I think it's probably meant to happen, because it really taught me some very, very valuable things and experiences that I would never, ever, ever would have dreamed of in a million years. So for that, I feel very blessed, and I have nothing ill to say, no ill feelings, no hard feelings about any of it, and I'm still forever grateful about the opportunity. Right? It's just like, you know, as a 25 or 26, whatever I was at the time, you know, it was every kid's dream to, like, you know, like walk out from a private jet and have like a fleet of Rolls Royces in front of you to just like ready to pick you up to like transport you to the hotel, right? Like it just like seemed like a movie, you know, like, you know, if you ask any like, you know, kid, that would be like, oh, like, you know, they would want that, right? You know, 100%. And I would say like, yeah, like, you know, it's but at the same time, it's like, it's the sense of satisfaction you get when, you know, it's not yours,
Yeah.
versus when it is like, yours, like it's two different, two completely different feeling, right? And then it just felt like, going with a life that I didn't really deserve versus a life that I feel like I'm purposefully, just to kind of live in, right? So, but yeah, anyways, that's quite an experience.
But I think to that note, that I think that was one, I find that was one of the story I find it very inspiring, because you really clear about what you want to do, and you really understand like what's your purpose in this world. And I think to that note, I think we're going to end here. And thanks so much for like sharing your story and your vision of DoWhatULuv Foundation. Hey,
yeah, no problem. Appreciate it, Jackie. Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, no, thank you.